Anjali.
I never believed the stories about the Roman catacombs, at least not the dramatic ones. Yes, I knew they were ancient burial tunnels, miles of cramped passageways carved into stone and earth beneath one of the world's most crowded cities. Yes, I knew thousands of bodies were placed there, arranged in alcoves that stretched on endlessly like honeycombs stuffed with the dead. But I always assumed the ghost stories, the disappearances, the warnings whispered at tourist stands, those were nothing more than marketing or superstitious nonsense. That changed the night I decided to explore a part of the catacombs closed to the public. I wasn't a thrill seeker or a daredevil. I was a doctoral student in archaeology at Sapienza University, working on a thesis about early Christian burial rituals. I had connections with the local custodians and had permission to access certain restricted sections, but there was one area, the so-called Zona Sepulta, the buried zone, that was off-limits even to researchers. No maps, no official records, a place supposedly sealed since the 16th century. According to rumor, workers had vanished there during restoration efforts. According to legend, something still lived there. According to me, at the time, this was all nonsense. So when a contact of mine, a caretaker named Giacomo, slipped me an old iron key and whispered, "You didn't get this from me," I didn't hesitate. I should have. I truly should have. But instead, I went. I entered the catacombs at dusk, long after tourists had been cleared out and the gates locked for the night. Giacomo let me in through a side door and walked away without a word, not even glancing back. I remember thinking it was strange how pale he looked, how tightly he clutched the rosary in his fist. I dismissed it. People who worked around the dead tended to pick up strange habits. I descended the stairs into the catacombs with my backpack, flashlight, camera, notes, and a sense of purpose that bordered on arrogance. The deeper I went, the more muffled Rome's familiar city noises became. By the time I reached the first level of tunnels, I could no longer hear traffic or voices, only the crunch of gravel under my boots and the faint, hollow echo of air moving somewhere far ahead. If you've never been inside the catacombs, it's hard to explain the feeling. They're not just tunnels, they're tombs. Endless corridors stacked wall to wall with niches, each one once containing a body wrapped in linen and packed into earth. Some still do. Many of the bones have been relocated, but traces remain. A tooth, a scrap of cloth, a stray femur. The smell is what hits you first, not rot. These remains are too ancient for that, but a dry, mineral coldness, like a cellar drenched in dust and history. The air is thin, and every exhale feels too loud. That night, the air felt even thinner. I followed my map to an intersection marked on an old sketch Giacomo had given me. There, hidden behind a fresco of the Madonna, was a stone door half swallowed by the wall. It should not have been there, not according to any modern record. I brushed away the dust and saw Latin words carved into the stone. Non resurgit qui dormit hic, he who sleeps here shall not rise. I took a picture. My hands shook slightly, though I told myself it was only excitement. The iron key fit perfectly. The door groaned as it opened, not outward, but inward, dragging itself across the stone floor as if resisting. Behind it was pure blackness. I stepped through. I expected another standard catacomb tunnel. Instead, the passageway beyond the door felt different, older, somehow. The walls weren't carved as neatly. The air smelled stale, stagnant, as though it had not circulated in centuries. I shone my flashlight around and noticed something else. The niches were different. They were smaller, narrower, as if the people buried here had been children. Rows and rows of tiny alcoves, stacked 5 or 6 high, each one sealed with crumbling plaster marked with faded symbols, crosses, circles, lines, spirals. The spirals showed up the most. At the time, I didn't know what they meant. I still don't. But I can't stop drawing them now, even when I don't realize it. I walked deeper. At first, everything seemed normal. Well, as normal as a forbidden burial tunnel could be. But then I began noticing sounds. Faint ones. Far behind me at first. Footsteps? No. More like the rustle of fabric dragging along stone. I told myself it was air. The deeper I went, the more the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly. One moment I was sweating beneath my jacket. The next I could see my breath puffing white in the beam of my flashlight. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It had stopped. I took out my phone. No signal, not surprising, but the time displayed was blank. Just 2 dashes. I should have turned around then. I should have left. But the tunnel sloped downward into a series of carved stairs, and curiosity clawed at me stronger than fear. The stairs were steep. My breaths echoed weirdly, as if the space swallowed sound but let it linger just long enough for me to hear distorted versions of it coming back. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel widened into a chamber. And in the chamber, I saw the first body. A real one. Not ancient, not mummified by time. Fresh. A man lay on the ground, back arched unnaturally, limbs twisted outward like a marionette dropped mid-dance. His eyes were wide open. His mouth, too. Every tooth was shattered. Every single one. I stumbled back in shock. My flashlight trembled. I scanned the walls for any sign of collapse or falling debris, anything that could explain this. But there was nothing. He hadn't been crushed. His teeth hadn't been knocked out. They had been broken from the inside. The moment I realized that, something scraped behind me. Not a small scrape. A long one, like fingernails dragging across stone. I spun around, beams swinging wildly, lighting up only empty tunnel. Hello. My voice cracked embarrassingly. Is someone there? Silence. Then, CRK, 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 a wet clicking sound, faint but rhythmic. I forced myself to breathe. Fear makes you hear things, I reminded myself. But my hands were shaking so violently, I dropped the flashlight. It hit the ground, flickered, and rolled, its beam spinning across the floor until it landed pointed at the corpse's face. The man's jaw moved. Just slightly. Just enough. I lunged for the flashlight, snatched it up, and sprinted out of the chamber, without looking back. My footsteps slammed against the floor, echoing in endless repetition down the narrow passage. I ran until the tunnel split in two. And that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. I did not remember passing this fork on my way in. The map in my pocket suddenly felt useless. I chose the left tunnel. The air grew colder. My breath grew louder. The whispered clicking sound followed quietly, like something crawling just out of sight, matching my pace. 10 minutes later, the tunnel ended abruptly in a wall of stone. When I turned around, the passage behind me was pitch black. My flashlight flickered again. Once, twice. Then it went out. Total darkness swallowed me whole. I slapped the flashlight, shook it, twisted the cap. Nothing. I tried my phone. Black screen. I tried my backup light. Dead. I could hear my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But beneath it, something else. Breathing. Not mine. Slow, deliberate inhalations coming from no more than a few inches away. I froze. Every muscle locked. The darkness was so absolute I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. The breathing grew louder, closer. Warm air feathered against my face. Something was standing right in front of me. I don't know how I found the strength, but I took a single step backward. The thing exhaled sharply, as if irritated. Then I heard it move. Not walking. Crawling. Fast. I stumbled backward blindly. My hand brushed the wall. I flattened myself against it, trying not to scream, trying not to breathe too loud. The crawling stopped. Silence swallowed everything. Then, directly beside my left ear, something whispered. Non-resurgent. The voice was thin, papery, like dried leaves rubbed together. Cadormit hic. I bolted. Blind, disoriented, arms outstretched, I ran through the dark. Stones scraped my shoulders. Cobwebs clung to my face. My knees cracked against uneven floor, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The whisper followed, always close, always in my ear no matter how fast I moved. At some point I tripped, tumbling down a slope of loose gravel. I hit the ground hard, sliding until my back slammed against a wall. My hand brushed something cold and metal. The flashlight. It flickered once and turned on. Weak, but enough. I aimed it around. I was back at the stone door. The same fresco. The same inscription. Non resurgit could dormit hic. The door was half open, as if waiting. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I squeezed through the opening, yanked the key free, and shoved the stone slab shut with all my strength. The whispering stopped. Instantly, I scrambled back up the stairs, through the tunnels up the entrance steps, and out into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the street and collapsed against a lamppost, gasping like I'd been drowning. Giacomo was waiting there. His face was ashen. "You went to the buried zone," he whispered. It wasn't a question. "Sta zitto. Don't tell anyone. Don't ever go back." I opened my mouth to speak, but then I heard it. A faint clicking sound, echoing from the cracks in the old stone walls behind us. Giacomo paled further. "They followed you." I haven't slept properly since. I hear the clicking every night now, behind walls and vents under the floor. Sometimes I hear the breathing too. Sometimes I feel warm air brush my face even when I'm alone. 3 times, I've woken to find dirt under my nails. Once, I woke with gravel in my hair. The worst part? Yesterday, I heard whispering again. Not outside. Inside. Inside my room. Right beside my left ear. Non resurgit could dormit hic. And last night, when I turned on the light, I found tiny spirals carved into my bedroom wall. Hundreds of them. I have always loved Rome for its beauty, but I learned far too late how ugly that beauty can become when the sun goes down. The city has a way of showing you things it shouldn't, things it wants you to see, things it wants to keep hidden, things that move when you're not looking. I need to start at the beginning, though. I need to explain everything exactly as it happened, because it sounds insane when I say it out loud. It feels insane writing it down. And yet, I know what I saw. I know what I lived through. And I know what's following me now. It began on my 3rd night in Rome, during a short solo trip I took after finishing my degree. I chose a cheap Airbnb near Piazza Navona, in an old building with stone steps that seemed too worn to be safe and ceilings so low you could touch the wooden beams if you stretched. The host was pleasant but strange. She handed me the keys with trembling fingers and said, "Whatever you do, don't go out after midnight. The statues don't like it when the city sleeps." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. She didn't. She pressed a small pendant into my hand, a tiny brass depiction of an angel holding a broken sword. "Keep this with you," she whispered, "for protection." I didn't want to insult her, so I took it. But the moment she turned away, I shoved it in my backpack and forgot about it. Later, I would wish I hadn't. My first 2 days were perfect. Sunlight on golden buildings, gelato twice a day, wandering the alleys like a character in some old Italian film. I visited the Pantheon, wandered across the Tiber, even got lost in Trastevere and loved every second of it. The only strange thing that happened during those days was small, barely worth mentioning at the time. But now I realize it was the first warning. It was the afternoon of my 2nd day. I was walking past the Fountain of Neptune when I noticed something odd. I had taken a photo of the marble figures, Neptune, tridents, the swirling horses, and as I looked at the screen, I realized one of the figures wasn't in the same position as before. One of the horses had its head turned. Not much, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. I blinked, glanced up, and it was normal. Camera glitch, I told myself. Probably lag. But deep down, a tiny sliver of unease settled inside me. The real horror began on the 3rd night. It was past 11 p.m. when I left a trattoria near my apartment. I'd stayed longer than planned, enjoying wine and good conversation with a French couple who were traveling through Italy. By the time we said our goodbyes, the streets were quiet, unusually so. Rome is never silent, not truly. Even at 2 a.m., there are always scooters, drunk tourists, vendors packing up. But that night, nothing. Not a single voice. Not a single engine. Not even dogs barking. I remember checking my phone. 11:47 p.m. Not past midnight, I thought. So I'm fine. But as I passed Piazza Navona, I felt watched. Not followed, watched. Like hundreds of tiny eyes pressed against the back of my neck. I told myself it was paranoia from walking alone at night. Then I heard a sound.
Scrape.
Very faint. Stone against stone. I stopped.
Turned.
Nothing. The piazza was empty. A wide, echoing expanse under yellow streetlights. I walked faster. Scrape. Again. Closer. I spun around. Still nothing. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but no. One of the statues near the Fountain of Neptune had changed position. I knew it. I'd seen that fountain a dozen times. The figures always stood perfectly still, frozen in dramatic tension. But now, one of the stone horses was facing me. Completely. Its neck twisted unnaturally, marble muscles bulging like frozen tendons, eyes carved wide open and staring straight at me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My body locked in place as fear rooted me to the stones beneath my feet. Then, slowly, horribly, the horse's jaw shifted open. Not wide, not like a human scream, but enough for the stone to crack. CRRK. My legs finally worked. I ran. Down the alley. Past the clothes shops. Past the church with iron gates. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but the scraping followed. Louder now. Faster. I burst into the courtyard near my Airbnb, fumbling for my keys. My hands shook so badly, I dropped them twice. Then, as I found the right key and shoved it into the lock, I heard the sound that will haunt me until the day I die. The soft thump of heavy stone feet hitting the ground behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, locked it, and backed away. The courtyard beyond the window was dark, deadly still. But then, faint but unmistakable, I saw a shadow shift. A massive one. A form too large and too heavy to be human. And then another. 2 shadows. 3. All silent, but all very, very real. I retreated into my room and curled up on the bed, shaking. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. When dawn finally broke, the shadows disappeared as if they'd never been there. But the stone dust in the courtyard remained. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the eerie silence of the streets had messed with my head. But then the Airbnb host knocked on my door around noon. She didn't greet me, didn't smile. She looked at the courtyard behind me, saw the dust, and whispered, "They came for you." I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but she put a finger to her lips. "You must leave before tonight," she said. "Once they notice you, they don't stop." "They?" I asked. "The Guardiani. The stone ones." She trembled as she spoke. "They walk after midnight. They protect the old places. They silence those who wander where they shouldn't." "You're joking," I said. She didn't laugh. She handed me 3 items: the angel pendant, a small candle, and an antique-looking key. "The pendant hides you," she said. "The candle buys you time. The key opens the safe place." "What's safe place?" "Any church, but only the old ones." I stared at her. She swallowed hard. "They know you now. They can smell the living. They can smell your fear." That was when I realized something even stranger. She was afraid to look directly behind me, as if something stood there. But nothing was there. I left Rome that afternoon, at least I tried. The morning train was fully booked. So was the afternoon. I had to take the late one. The very late one. 9:55 p.m. I told myself it was fine as long as I stayed inside the station. There were lights, security, people. Crowds. Safety. Or so I thought. I spent the evening sitting on a bench near the platform, checking the time every few minutes. The station was bright, loud, full of movement, everything the streets had not been the night before. At 9:41 p.m., a man sat beside me, dressed like a priest but older than any priest I'd seen. He smelled faintly of incense and dust. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "You should not be here tonight. My blood chilled. Do you know about the statues? He nodded slowly. All of us old ones know. I didn't know what he meant, but before I could ask, he pointed at my backpack. You kept the pendant? Yes. Wear it. Now. His voice sharpened. They will search for you soon. What are they? He stared at the floor, lips trembling. The first protectors of the city. Older than Christianity. Older than Rome itself. Bound to the stone. The moment you saw them, they saw you. Can I leave? He shook his head. You can run, but they will follow. They always follow. My throat clenched. Why me? Because you looked too closely. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire station went dark. Screams erupted. Phones lit up the darkness. People stumbled in panic as echoes bounced through the corridors. In that moment of chaos, I saw something move far down the platform. A massive silhouette. Then another. Then more. Long, shuddering figures with jagged, broken outlines. Sharp limbs. Heavy feet that slammed into concrete without sound. Statues. Walking. Searching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The priest grabbed my wrist. Run. I can't outrun. Run. I ran. The emergency lights came on, dim, red, flickering. The shadows behind me lengthened across the floor. Then I heard the scraping. Stone claws on tile. Not fast, but steady. Purposeful. They weren't rushing. They knew they had time. The train platform blurred as I sprinted past. I shoved through a crowd, nearly tripping over a suitcase, and tore down the stairs to the lower level. The air smelled like oil and dust. The priest's voice echoed behind me. Find a church. Any old church. I'm in a train station. I shouted back. Then make one. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw a small alcove, a forgotten chapel tucked near the restrooms, door half open, light flickering inside. I bolted through the doorway and slammed it shut just as something heavy struck the wall behind me. The candle the host had given me fell out of my bag and rolled across the floor. I picked it up with shaking hands. My lighter flicked once, twice. A spark. A flame. I lit the candle. The moment the flame caught, the pounding on the door stopped. Silence. Not because they'd given up. No. Because they were waiting. Waiting for the flame to die. That was 3 days ago. The candle burned out at dawn, but by then the station was full of people again, noise again, movement again. The statues had returned to wherever they go when the sun rises. I should have fled. I should have taken the first flight home. But I didn't. Because that night, in that tiny chapel, I saw something carved into the wall behind the altar, something I cannot unsee dozens of figures. All in stone, not reaching out. Reaching away. Trying to escape whatever was outside. I realized something horrifying then. The statues weren't trying to get in. They were trying to stop me from getting out. Because once I left, people always assume the metro tunnels are empty at night, that once the last train finishes its route, the platforms fall silent and nothing moves beneath the city until dawn. But that isn't true. The tunnels breathe. They shift. They echo with things that aren't supposed to be down there. I didn't know that when I first started my night shift job. I was a maintenance inspector for Rome's underground rail system. The pay was terrible, the hours worse, but I needed the job. My shift started at midnight and ended at 6. Every night, I walked the length of Line B's older tunnels, clipboard in hand, checking the electrical boxes, emergency lights, and structural supports. The first 2 months were uneventful, boring even. Just the hum of distant generators, the occasional drip of moisture from overhead pipes, the squeak of rats darting between the tracks. I'd put in my headphones, listen to podcasts, and try not to think about the blackness behind me. But everything changed on a Thursday. The night I heard whispers coming from a sealed tunnel. I was working near the Castro Pretorio station, a forgotten stretch of the line that most people never see. There's a section they're blocked off by welded iron bars and thick concrete walls. According to our manuals, it's an abandoned construction passage, left unfinished in the 1960s. The wall had always unnerved me. It felt out of place, too thick, too deliberate. like someone didn't want anyone to ever walk through it again.
Anyway,
That night, I was checking the emergency lights when I heard a voice. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakably human. A low, muffled whisper coming from the other side of the sealed tunnel. At first, I thought it was an echo of street noise vibrating through the ground, but the whisper came again louder, closer. Then a second voice joined it. I stepped back instinctively, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air around the blocked passage grew noticeably colder. I leaned in slowly. That was when something scraped the other side of the concrete. A long, dragging sound, like fingernails. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my light. My breath fogged the air around me. I checked the tunnel temperature gauge, 9 degrees Celsius. Much colder than it should have been. Probably the pipes, I whispered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I turned to leave when something slammed against the wall, hard enough that dust rained from the ceiling. I ran, clipboard forgotten, flashlight barely guiding me. I sprinted down the tracks toward Castro Pretorio Station. I didn't stop until I reached the lit platform. My supervisor, Marco, found me 5 minutes later, shaking like an addict. "What happened?" he asked. I told him about the whispering, the scraping, the slam. I expected him to laugh. Instead, his face drained of all color. "Which wall?" he demanded. "The sealed one." He cursed softly under his breath. "You don't go near that place. Ever. Understood? But what's inside?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just rubbed his temple and said, "Some tunnels should remain closed." That was the only explanation I got. For the next 3 nights, I refused to go near that section. I stuck strictly to assigned routes, even if it meant doubling back. But on Sunday, I got a message from Marco telling me to meet him near the sealed passage at 3 a.m. No explanation. Just, come alone. Bring a light. I didn't want to go. But when your boss tells you to meet him underground at 3 a.m., you go. When I arrived, Marco wasn't there. The entire tunnel was silent. Too silent. My flashlight flickered, then stabilized. I waited. Every second felt like an hour. Then I heard footsteps. But not from in front of me, behind me. Heavy ones. Slow ones. I spun around. No one. Just darkness stretching endlessly down the tracks. People always assume the metro tunnels are empty at night, that once the last train finishes its route, the platforms fall silent and nothing moves beneath the city until dawn. But that isn't true. The tunnels breathe. They shift. They echo with things that aren't supposed to be down there. I didn't know that when I first started my night shift job. I was a maintenance inspector for Rome's underground rail system. The pay was terrible, the hours worse, but I needed the job. My shift started at midnight and ended at 6. Every night, I walked the length of Line B's older tunnels, clipboard in hand, checking the electrical boxes, emergency lights, and structural supports. The first 2 months were uneventful, boring even. Just the hum of distant generators, the occasional drip of moisture from overhead pipes, the squeak of rats darting between the tracks. I'd put in my headphones, listen to podcasts, and try not to think about the blackness behind me. But everything changed on a Thursday. The night I heard whispers coming from a sealed tunnel. I was working near the Castro Pretorio Station, a forgotten stretch of the line that most people never see. There's a section blocked off by welded iron bars and thick concrete walls. According to our manuals, it's an abandoned construction passage, left unfinished in the 1960s. The wall had always unnerved me. It felt out of place, too thick, too deliberate. Like someone didn't want anyone to ever walk through it again.
Anyway,
that night, I was checking the emergency lights when I heard a voice. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakably human. A low, muffled whisper coming from the other side of the sealed tunnel. At first, I thought it was an echo of street noise vibrating through the ground, but the whisper came again louder, closer. Then a second voice joined it. I stepped back instinctively, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air around the blocked passage grew noticeably colder. I leaned in slowly. That was when something scraped the other side of the concrete. A long, dragging sound, like fingernails. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my light. My breath fogged the air around me. I checked the tunnel temperature gauge, 9 degrees Celsius. Much colder than it should have been. Probably the pipes, I whispered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I turned to leave when something slammed against the wall, hard enough that dust rained from the ceiling. I ran. Clipboard forgotten, flashlight barely guiding me. I sprinted down the tracks toward Castro Pretorio Station. I didn't stop until I reached the lit platform. My supervisor, Marco, found me 5 minutes later, shaking like an addict. "What happened?" he asked. I told him about the whispering, the scraping, the slam. I expected him to laugh. Instead, his face drained of all color. "Which wall?" he demanded. "The sealed one." He cursed softly under his breath. "You don't go near that place. Ever. Understood? But what's inside?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just rubbed his temple and said, "Some tunnels should remain closed." That was the only explanation I got. For the next 3 nights, I refused to go near that section. I stuck strictly to assigned routes, even if it meant doubling back. But on Sunday, I got a message from Marco telling me to meet him near the sealed passage at 3 a.m. No explanation. Just, "Come alone. Bring a light." I didn't want to go. But when your boss tells you to meet him underground at 3 a.m., you go. When I arrived, Marco wasn't there. The entire tunnel was silent. Too silent. My flashlight flickered, then stabilized. I waited. Every second felt like an hour. Then I heard footsteps. But not from in front of me, behind me. Heavy ones. Slow ones. I spun around. No one. Just darkness stretching endlessly down the tracks. "Marco." I called out. My voice echoed, bouncing unnaturally. A whisper answered. Not Marco's voice. A different one. Close to my ear.
Don't look at them.
I froze. The sealed wall behind me groaned, like something was pressing against it from the inside. The metal bars rattled. The concrete bulged, just slightly, but enough to make my stomach twist. Another whisper slipped out, like air escaping a dying lung. Then a second. Then dozens. Whispers overlapping, crawling over each other, voices soaked in agony and hunger. I didn't stay. I turned and ran as fast as I could. The air behind me shifted, like something big had just started moving. Something with weight. Something not human. As I sprinted toward Castro Pretorio, the tunnel lights flickered wildly. The emergency sirens briefly sputtered on, then died. In the darkness between each flicker, I saw shapes. Tall ones. Thin ones. Bending in impossible angles as they crawled along the walls like insects made of shadows. 3 times I saw pale hands reach from the darkness toward the tracks. Twice I heard shuffling right behind me. And once, only once, I felt something cold brush my ankle. By the time I reached the station platform, I was sobbing. Not crying.
Sobbing.
Because something followed me out. I could feel it, hovering in the blackness, just beyond the light. Watching. Waiting. Marco never showed up that night. He never answered his phone again. He never came back to work. His apartment was found empty. His car left in the garage. His uniform hanging neatly in his closet. No one spoke of him again. I should have quit. I should have packed my bags and left Rome entirely. But I convinced myself it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe even carbon monoxide exposure. I returned to work. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Not until I found my new assignment in my locker. A thin paper slip.
No name.
No signature. Just 4 words. Check the sealed tunnel. My blood froze. I went straight to management. But the shift supervisor said he hadn't assigned it. The scheduler said the same. No one admitted to sending it. When I showed them the slip, the supervisor frowned and asked, "Why would we send you near something that doesn't exist?" I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "It's right there. The old construction wall. The sealed passage." He shook his head. "There is no sealed passage on line B." "Yes, there is," I snapped. "Near Castro Pretorio." He blinked at me, confused. "There's nothing sealed in that section. It's just a straight tunnel. No forks. No barriers. Nothing. I felt sick. No, I whispered. You're wrong. He folded his arms. You've walked that line every night for months. You know what's there. I ran. I grabbed my flashlight, left the maintenance room, and sprinted down the tunnel. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't stop until I reached it. The wall, exactly where it had always been. The thick concrete, the welded bars, the faded caution paint. Impossible to miss. But something was different. Something that made every hair on my body stand up. The concrete was cracked. Freshly cracked. Long fissures ran down the surface like veins, as though something inside had pushed. Hard. Hard enough to nearly break through. That was when the whispering returned.
Soft. Hungry.
Look, I staggered backward. Look, the concrete bulged outward. A pale, thin hand slid through a crack, fingers stretching, reaching blindly for the air. I screamed, fell to the ground, scrambled backward on hands and feet. As I crawled away, the hand turned toward me. It didn't stop reaching. The fingers kept extending, stretching too long, too thin, bending like wet clay. I ran. I didn't stop until I burst into the maintenance office, vomiting from fear and exhaustion. I told my supervisor everything. He stared at me silently. Then he sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He opened a drawer and took out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Marco's handwriting. It said, if he starts hearing them, remove him from line B. Why? I whispered. He looked at me, eyes full of resignation. Because once they whisper to you, they don't stop. That was 2 months ago. I transferred positions. New shift. New lines to check. New supervisors. But it didn't help. The whispering followed. At first only underground. Then in my apartment. Behind my bed. In the ventilation shafts. In the elevator. In my car. Last night, I found dark dirt on my bedroom floor.
Tunnel dirt.
This morning, I found thin scratch marks on my front door. Not outside. Inside. And just an hour ago, as I sat down to write this, my phone buzzed. One new message. From Marco's number. No words.
Just a voice recording.
I hit play, and I heard it. The same whisper I heard months ago in the sealed tunnel. The same one that called my name in the dark. Only now it was closer. Right behind the microphone. And at the end of the recording, something scrapes. Then a familiar voice, Marco's voice, whispers. Don't look at them, they see movement. My hallway light just went out. I hear breathing outside my door.
Slow. Wet. Wrong.
I think they finally found me.